Penguin Random House Canada presents 52 Ways to Reconcile: How to Walk with Indigenous Peoples on the Path to Healing by David A. Robertson. Read for you by the author. I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do. Edward Everett Hale. Introduction. My first published book, Stone, came out in March 2010, book one in a graphic novel series entitled 7 Generations. Before that, I had self-published, in partnership with the Helen Betty Osborne Memorial Foundation, a graphic novel entitled The Life of Helen Betty Osborne. That was in 2008. The first several books I published through Highwater Press in Winnipeg were short graphic novels. I intentionally decided to focus on comics because they have done a lot of damage through the representation of Indigenous people in history over the last 70 years or so. I have always had the mindset that we should fight fire with fire. Following that logic, if comics had done damage, why could they not also undo that damage? If comics stereotyped Indigenous people and trivialized our many distinct cultures and languages, and our place in history, they could also do the opposite. Since 2010, graphic novels and comic books have become a go-to medium for many Indigenous writers and illustrators across Turtle Island, one of many forms of literature, and within those forms, genres that Indigenous creators have embraced to tell our stories. The overarching goal, as I see it, is at once damage control and sharing knowledge so that people, children, and adults are better prepared to do the work of reconciliation. However, it is sometimes hard to understand the work of reconciliation because the term itself can be difficult to define. So, if we are going to discuss reconciliation and what our roles are and can be, we ought to define it as best we can. It's a relatively new term insofar as it's applied to Canada and its relationship with Indigenous peoples, coming into prominence in 2008 with the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. Since 2008, it has become ubiquitous and inextricably tied to the long-term goal of healing the relationship between Indigenous peoples and Canada at large. However, in being used so widely and indiscriminately, it has started to lose its luster and meaning. As a result, we are in danger of losing our focus, and maybe even, in the not-so-distant future, our interest. That is something we cannot afford. After all, when you look at things objectively, we have come so far in a relatively short period. Just think about how, in a decade, we have gone from barely talking about the Indian residential school system in schools to teaching it at almost every grade level, from coast to coast to coast. You cannot visit a school in Canada and find students who do not know about the Indian residential school system. Trust me, I speak to tens of thousands of kids every year. I suppose what scares me is that all of this will become rote, because if it does, it will mean less. And if it means less, if we act with less intention, we will not get to where we need to be. For reconciliation to work, we need everybody. And we need everybody to be passionate about it. Let's start with the word reconciliation. It is likely that I will mention my father, Donald Robertson, several times in this book, so it makes sense to get that out of the way early. Dad and I used to discuss reconciliation often. We talked about what it was, what it ought to be, and what it involved for everybody, acknowledging that we all have different roles, whether you are an Indigenous person or a non-Indigenous person. Technically, reconciliation is defined as the restoration of friendly relations. Two good friends become estranged for whatever reason, and after many years find their way back to each other, and one sees the other as a friend once more. There was a good relationship, something caused it to fracture, and then a healing occurred, and the relationship was restored. The two people reconciled. Now, this is not intended to be a history book, but there is enough evidence in academic work to support the claim that between Indigenous peoples and colonists, there never was a right relationship. If there is not a good relationship to begin with, what exactly are we restoring? The work that we are trying to do, then, is to develop a strong and healthy relationship for the first time. Don't get me wrong, I believe that we are getting there, but reconciliation is something of a misnomer. At the time of my father's passing, in December 2019, he and a group of elders, or grandparents as he liked to refer to them, were trying to come up with a term that better suited the act. Maybe one of the acts to reconcile is spending time thinking about what a suitable term might be, but that doesn't seem as active as I want it to be. So for the sake of argument, keeping in mind that we are working with an imperfect term, let's go with it. Let's focus on how to build something together that is lasting, because it will be on a solid foundation. The last thing Dad said to me was to ask, aren't there more important things to worry about right now? His point is well taken. If we worry too much about a term, we may lose sight of the action that is required. That is one thing I know for sure. Reconciliation is an action. I know that as much as I know that each of us has a role to play. It's just that we have different roles. Part of how we move forward is to understand truth, accept it, and then fully explore what our role is. That's emblematic of a community. We don't all do the same thing. And if we did, some things would not get done. There is no job that is smaller or bigger than another. I'm a hockey dad, so pardon the analogy, but there are positions to play. You have yours, and I have mine. And when everybody figures out what position they have and how to play that position most effectively, we have a better chance of winning. And you have to believe, as a community, if we do this right, we all win. So, what are our roles? You cannot heal brokenness from a place of brokenness. That's what a principal at Jack River School in Norway House Cree Nation told me a few years ago when I was visiting the community and speaking to students at the school. She was talking about teachers working hard to enrich the lives of children in the community, but dealing with their own trauma, and how difficult it was to help children navigate trauma from a place of personal, unresolved pain. I've thought a lot about that since our conversation, and what I have come to understand and see in my own life as well is that Indigenous people have healing to do from the impacts of colonialism. I do not speak my father's first language, Swampy Cree, due to the impacts of colonialism, both in his life and the life of my grandmother. My road to healing has been to be an active participant in the movement towards language revitalization. Every book of mine since 2018 has Swampy Cree in it. I want kids to feel motivated to learn their language, and I am learning a little bit myself too. We all have more work to do, living through the very loud echo of intergenerational trauma, and it's hard. We need time and space to do that work. There is the larger movement we have known as reconciliation, which is the development of a good relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. But for Indigenous people, there's also reconciliation needed within communities, families, and the individual. I would argue that one must take precedence over the other. That is not to say we do not have a larger role to play in reconciliation. We are meant to be storytellers, to share truths so that other people have the knowledge required to take meaningful action. Jody Wilson-Raybould articulates this process very well in her book, True Reconciliation. If the role of Indigenous people is to be storytellers, what is your role? Because there is no question that you have one. Reconciliation is a community effort, and for it to work, it's all hands on deck. As individuals, we have considerable influence. If we are complacent and do nothing, other people will do nothing. If we are active and do something, we will inspire other people to do something. And there is so much to do. This movement is far-reaching. The IRSS will always be at the heart of it, but it also involves the colonial history and contemporary barriers of this country, From foster care and the 60s scoop to healthcare to just...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?